Thanks again for tuning into Moonshine Gaming. Today we're going to be discussing the top 10 rarest and most expensive Nintendo NES games.
The Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
Now, as per usual, we have a few parameters we're going to be following for this list. And the list of parameters is kind of long this time, so here we go. First off, we're not including any competition cartridges, so Nintendo World Championships and Nintendo Campus Challenge will not be included. We won't be including any test cartridges, so the Zelda test cartridge will not be included along with others. We won't be including any unreleased games, so Cheetah Man 2 is out. We won't be including any case variants. We won't be including any unlicensed games, so Peekaboo Poker, Bubble Bath Babes, and Hot Slots will not be included. And we won't be including any graded games, so everything we list is going to be complete ungraded games. And we will be using North American complete in-box pricing, so what this means is that the game box, instruction manual, inserts, and game cartridge are going to be included for all the prices on this list. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we've got Mighty Final Fight. This is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that was released in 1993. This is technically a spin-off of Capcom's 1989 arcade game Final Fight, and the characters in this version are depicted in a comical, childlike, chibi art style, which I think was a unique and awesome change from the original. The game's plot is a comical retelling of the story from the first game, and like the SNES ports, this is a single-player game. However, unlike the SNES versions, it retains all 3 playable characters from the arcade version. This version also includes an experience point system that allows the players to learn new fighting moves. The number of experience points awarded after defeating an enemy is dependent on the finishing move used by the player, with stronger moves giving more points. After accumulating a certain number of experience points, the players will move to the next level, increasing their attack power and maximum vitality. There are 6 levels in total, and once your character reaches level 4, you'll receive an additional special attack. Mighty Final Fight is a solid brawler that does the series justice. The combat's fast-paced and packs a punch, the graphics are vibrant and detailed, and the over-the-top animations are incredible. And though the game largely sticks to the franchise's tried and true formula, new features like the excellent experience system do a great job at keeping things fresh. I've got to say though that a 2-player co-op mode would have been an awesome addition, and the spongy controls and uneven difficulty can be rage-inducing at times. However, if you don't mind the challenge, Mighty Final Fight is a must-play game for any fan of the beat-em-up genre. The current market value of this game is $1,202. Next up, we've got Donkey Kong Jr. Math. This was an educational math game released in 1986. This was the only game released in the Education series of NES games in North America. The Education series was supposed to be a series of educational games released by Nintendo, and there was supposed to originally be 3 entries, including a Donkey Kong music game and something else that's unknown. But the other 2 games were never released because of how much of a failure Donkey Kong Jr. Math was. The game features 1-player and 2-player modes. In the 1-player mode, the objective is to enter math answers in order to receive points, and in the 2-player mode, each player applies a math operation between addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division to the number that they have to make it another number, trying to eventually reach a mutual goal number. However, signs and numbers are on the same field for each player, and they've got to race each other to reach the final number. First off, there's only 2 levels in the entire game. That's pretty sad. The sound isn't great, and the best thing going for the game is its graphics, which are still mediocre at best. The math problems are very simple for the most part, and the limited content isn't helped at all by the stiff and confusing controls. You have to give props to Nintendo for attempting to dive into the edutainment genre before it was such a mainstream thing, but unfortunately Donkey Kong Jr. Math did not hit the mark at all. They clearly just used the Donkey Kong name to add star power to an otherwise bad game. This game's pretty horrible, and I would not feel right encouraging anyone to play it. The current market value of this game is $1,295. Next up, we've got Disney's Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers 2. This is a platforming game that was released in 1994, and the game's based on the Disney cartoon Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, obviously, and is a sequel to the 1990 video game for the NES of the same name. The game features a single-player and 2-player cooperative mode. As with the first game, each individual stage is set up in side-scrolling levels where Chip 'n Dale can walk, jump, duck, and pick up objects such as acorns, crates, barrels, and balls to throw at enemies and bosses. Each character can withstand only 3 direct hits before they lose a life, although it is possible to earn more hits over the course of the game. Unlike the first game, there's no map screen, as the stages are set up in linear order, with the exception of the amusement park stage. Another new feature in the game is the ability for one player to pick up and throw the other player as a weapon. Very cool addition. For those of you who have played Rescue Rangers 1, this game is a half-decent sequel but isn't quite as good as the first installment in my opinion. The controls are still great and the level design is fun, but there are less levels in number 2, and also the graphics can feel muddy and unattractive in the early stages. Luckily, there was one noticeable improvement for the second game: the boss battles, which are amazing. The fights have graduated from the ball-chucking formula of the first game and have added upgraded boss attack patterns and battlefield hazards. If you've played the first, you already know what to expect from this installment. I think it would have been nice to see some new items, branching paths, or maybe multiple endings, but instead the map screen was completely eliminated and the game was made much more linear. Although this is still a really fun game, I definitely think they could have done it better. The current market value of this game is $1,307. Next up, we've got Bobble Part 2. This is a puzzle platforming game that was released in 1993. Bobble Part 2 keeps the core gameplay of its predecessor, with most stages consisting of a single screen full of platforms and enemies who must be defeated before you can move on to the next challenge. Enemies can be trapped in bubbles that your character shoots out of his mouth, and those bubbles can then be popped and the enemies inside turn to delicious foods, which can then be picked up for bonus points. The sequel adds a few new mechanics that weren't present in the first Bobble, with the most important of those being the ability to store multiple bubbles inside your dinosaur. Holding B causes Bub or Bob to inflate, allowing for them to slowly float in the air. Releasing B will cause them to shoot 3 bubbles at once. This isn't terribly useful against regular enemies, but the technique is really good against bosses and mini-bosses. The graphics in Part 2 are great, with detailed sprites that have been given just enough of a size increase to allow for more detail without making the stages feel too crowded. Each world also comes with its own unique music, most of which is a great improvement over the first Bobble iconic but limited soundtrack. One of the biggest downfalls to Part 2 is its lack of cooperative 2-player mode. In Part 1, you could have 2 players playing simultaneously, however they removed that function in Part 2 for some reason. Instead, they replaced it with a 2-player mode where the players rotate taking turns every time a life is lost. Dumb. Part 2 is meant to feel like an adventure, and one that can be completed in a single sitting. In some ways, it's an improvement over its prequel, but it's sad that Bobble Part 2 abandoned so many of the cool concepts from the first Bobble. It's still a pretty fun and cute game that's worth checking out. The current market value of this game is $1,596. Next up, we've got Power Blade 2. This is an action platforming game that was released in 1992. This is a sequel to the game Power Blade that was released for the NES in 1991. The original Power Blade was basically a Mega Man ripoff that ended up being pretty good. The game takes place in the year 2200 and follows Nova, the protagonist from the first Power Blade game, as he sets out on a mission for the US Department of Defense to destroy the Delta Foundation, who's created a new cyborg that can threaten global security if it falls into the wrong hands. The game control is almost identical to the first Power Blade, but your character seems to walk a little bit slower. This is counteracted with a new slide technique, similar to Mega Man, which allows you to move faster and slide under enemy fire. The graphics are a bit darker than its predecessor and don't look as good in my opinion. Similar situation with the music, where the tunes in the first game were a bit more catchy. In this game, the main focus is on the power suits. In each level, you can fight an optional mid-boss, which is really just a variation of the dragon boss from the original Power Blade, and if you win this battle, you get one of 4 specialized suits. They all have the same super powerful energy attack, but each also has some unique special abilities. Power Blade 2 is a good game, but still felt a little bit disappointing. The power suit mechanic was a great addition, but it's sad that not all aspects of the original game were improved upon. The current market value of this game is $1,805. Now for a quick word from the sponsor of this video. No, I'm just kidding. Nobody's sponsoring this small channel. But if you enjoy content like this, we put out video game related content every single Thursday, and you can consider subscribing to Moonshine Gaming to stay up to date with future videos. Back to the list. Next up, we've got Bonk's Adventure. This is a side-scrolling platform game released in 1994. You play as Bonk, a strong and bald cave boy who battles anthropomorphic dinosaurs and other prehistoric enemies. Bonk's mission is to rescue Princess Za, who's been kidnapped by the evil King Drool. While Bonk was known primarily for being the leading franchise on the TurboGrafx 16/PC engine, Bonk also received an adaptation on the NES, in addition to the Game Boy, Amiga, and even an arcade game. Speaking of TurboGrafx 16, if you want to check out our previous video for the top 10 rarest and most expensive TurboGrafx 16 games, we'll link it above and in the description below. The NES port had to have the colors downgraded due to hardware limitations, but the graphics look pretty good, all things considered. Another thing to note is that the amount of space on an NES cartridge was also much smaller, and some levels had to be cut from the original game. Also, some of the remaining levels had to be edited as well. You also won't find the NES version to be as challenging as the original, as the hardware wasn't able to put as many enemies on screen at a time. Bonk's adventure is easy to pick up but hard to put down. Simple fun is its main draw, but the game also has a few more complicated mechanics to keep you on your toes if you're looking for more out of the game. Its bad music and merely decent level design doesn't detract too much from the enjoyable gameplay, but both of these aspects are better executed in the game's original version. It's safe to say that the TurboGrafx 16 version of this game is far superior to the NES version and is better in every single way, but don't get the wrong impression, this is still a great game, and if you're a platforming fan, you'll definitely have a good time playing Bonk's adventure on the NES. The current market value of this game is $2,080. Next up, we've got Flintstones, The Surprise at Dinosaur Peak. This is a platforming game that was released in 1994. This platformer, based on the hit Hanna-Barbera cartoon, arrived pretty late on the NES scene. This seems to be a trend today, with most of the games on this list releasing years after the launch of the Super Nintendo. On top of this, the game was reportedly exclusive to Blockbuster Video for the majority of its run, further alienating itself from the market. Although no hard evidence has been found to confirm this fact, so this could be just a rumor. In the game, you can switch playable characters between both Fred and Barney, and they both have different attacks and abilities. Fred can use a club to bash enemies at close range, while Barney has a slingshot and can use it at certain distances to attack enemies from far away. Some parts of the game require different strategies, often cases where you'll have to swap between Fred and Barney in order to progress in the level. The first few levels of the game are kinda bland, but about halfway through the game, it really starts to pick up and challenge the player. Many of the later levels require tight platforming, quick character changes, and some serious endurance with some longer levels. There's also a variety of mini-games to play, such as ice hockey and basketball, to earn some extra lives. One of the downsides to this game is its fidgety controls. Fred's ledge grab ability and Barney's ability to stand on poles never really feels fluid. This is unfortunate because once you progress to the later stages in the game, you'll be required to use these skills a lot, resulting in some cheap feeling deaths. With some tighter controls, this game could have been significantly better. Overall, the Flintstones, The Surprise at Dinosaur Peak is a pretty good game, and had it released a couple years prior, I'm sure it would have been more well known. The current market value of this game is $2,561. Next up, we've got Panic Restaurant. This is a platforming game that was released in 1992. Panic Restaurant stars a chef named Cookie who must navigate through his own restaurant, which has been cursed by rival chef named Odove. Cookie has to battle evil food monsters with kitchen utensil weapons in 6 levels before taking on Odove in a final battle. You can attack enemies with your frying pan for short range attacks, spoon for mid range, and plates for long range. You can also hop on your fork like a pogo, but if you're hit even once, you'll reduce back to the frying pan weapon. You can also headbutt enemies. As ridiculous as this game's concept may seem, it does make for a pretty good platformer. The assortment of enemies are great, and most of them have unique attack patterns. The bosses are just as silly as the normal enemies. There's a mad popcorn dish, an ice cream cone, and even an angry microwave. Their attack patterns are relatively simple to figure out, but these boss battles can still be pretty tricky. The game is well paced, with extra lives and life-restoring food placed exactly where you need them. Unfortunately, there's only 6 stages, and they can feel pretty short. While Panic Restaurant's brief length is a bummer, it's fun while it lasts. All in all, Panic Restaurant is a solid game. It isn't complicated, doesn't have any innovative features, but does what it does well. It may not be the best title that Taito released on the NES, but I can't deny that it's a really fun platformer. The current market value of this game is $2,801. Next up, we've got Little Samson. This is a platforming game that was released in 1992. The game was released by Taito, and this is actually the 5th Taito game on this list, alongside Power Blade 2, Bobble 2, Flintstones, and Panic Restaurant. I'm not sure why, but it seems like Taito got their act together after the launch of the SNES in 1991, as they have a ton of solid games that were released between 91 and 94. To be honest, almost everything about this game is incredible. The music is catchy and memorable, game controls are tight and responsive, and the graphics are smooth and colorful. Throughout the game, you'll meet a few allies that'll join your team, which include a dragon, a golem, and a mouse. You'll be able to rotate between these characters at will. As you progress in the game, you'll encounter situations where you'll have to switch your character to one of your allies to progress. This is kind of similar to what I was explaining in the Flintstones game. When it comes to the game's visual appeal, the bosses deserve a special mention for looking incredibly wicked in addition to being fun and challenging battles. Many of them clash with the cute designs of the protagonists and would look more at home in a game like Castlevania. There wasn't one bad boss fight in this whole game. Little Samson has it all. Gorgeous graphics, vibrant music, solid gameplay, an even difficulty curve, and decent length over numerous levels with good variety. Like many others on this list, this game was released later in the NES's lifespan, which made its rarity inevitable, but it's unlikely that it could have been made earlier due to its advanced graphical detail. As the only game of its kind with no plans for any sequels or additional memorabilia, Samson and Friends had little chance to prosper outside their current cult status. This game is one of my personal favorites on the Nintendo. The current market value of this game is $5,664. Next up, number 1, Stadium Events. This is a sports fitness game that was released in 1987. In the game, the players compete in 4 Olympic events: the 100-meter dash, 110-meter hurdles, long jump, and triple jump. It's funny to think that a sort of spiritual predecessor to Wii Fit, which is one of the most successful games of all time, would be the rarest, most obscure game on the NES, and possibly in gaming altogether. What makes this otherwise standard game so rare is that just after release it was actually recalled. As an official third-party title, Stadium Events made use of an accessory called the Family Fun Fitness Pad. Say that 10 times fast. It required the players to run and step rapidly in order to complete each event. It's kind of like a DDR mat. Upon its release, Nintendo decided to grant the game a first-party production, recalling all the initial cartridges that had been sent out. The game would later become world-class track meet and would be played with Nintendo's own controller called the Power Pad. Both became very common and were often packed in with a lot of NES consoles, but Stadium Events, the original anomaly, had snuck out in very limited numbers. Rumor has it that only around 2,000 copies of the game were manufactured, and only 200 of those shipped to retail, selling exclusively at Woolworths in the northeastern United States. It should be noted that the PAL versions were not recalled and are not worth as much, even though many eBay sellers try and pass them off as rarities or jump on the hype of the rare North American version. This is not only the rarest commercial release for the NES, but also one of the rarest video games of all time. The current market value of this game is $51,630. What was your favorite game on the list? You can let us know down in the comments, and also if you have any suggestions for future top 10 videos, you can let us know down below. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next time.